Amid the bustling chaos of a supermarket in downtown Los Angeles, Peter, a young man with Down syndrome, was doing his best to stay composed. It was his first day on the job. The cheerful chatter of shoppers and the clattering of carts filled the air. Peter wanted to make a good impression. More than that, he wanted to prove he was capable. But his determination would soon be put to the test. Not long after his shift began, an impatient customer began shouting at him, his voice echoing down the aisles. "Can someone move this kid already? I don't have all day," the man barked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Other customers looked over uncomfortably, but no one stepped in. Peter, dressed neatly in his uniform, tried to ignore the insults. He focused on his task, bagging groceries, organizing items carefully, just as he had been taught. But the whispers began to mount. "He's so slow," one customer muttered. Peter heard it, but kept his eyes down. He didn't want to lose focus. He didn't want them to be right. He had heard such words before, too many times. Growing up in a difficult household, the voice of his stepfather still echoed in his memory. "You'll never amount to anything. Don't even try." But Peter had chosen not to believe that lie. That morning, when he arrived at the store, the manager, Jack, greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team, Peter. We're glad to have you here." "Thank you, sir. I'll do my very best," Peter replied with quiet enthusiasm. Eager to learn, he had thrown himself into the work, attentively following every instruction, checking each product, scanning codes carefully. But not everyone was as patient as Jack. Toward the end of his shift, exhausted but proud, Peter was finishing up with his last customer when a sharp sigh from behind snapped his attention. The automatic doors slid open. A woman in her mid-40s entered. She wore a designer coat, high heels clicking against the tiles, and a permanent scowl that seemed aimed at the world. She moved through the store like she owned it, tossing items into her cart with theatrical disdain. "These stores never get better," she muttered loudly, making sure others could hear. That woman's name was Karen. When she finally reached the checkout line, her eyes landed on Peter, calmly bagging groceries. She frowned, rolled her eyes. "This must be a joke," she mumbled under her breath. "How can someone that slow be allowed to work here?" She began slamming her items onto the conveyor belt, one after another, aggressive and impatient. Peter, still trying to be polite, looked up and offered a small smile. "Good morning, ma'am." Karen gave him a cold stare. "At this pace, I'll be here all day," she snapped. Peter swallowed hard and tried to speed up. His hands moved quickly but carefully, scanning barcodes, checking for damage, doing his best to stay calm. But Karen's constant tapping on the counter and dramatic sighs made it harder. "Are you going to be lying?" she barked. "It's like watching someone move in slow motion." Peter's cheeks flushed. His hands trembled. He tried harder, but in his hurry, one of the bags slipped from his grip and hit the floor with a dull thud. Karen smirked, and then, loud enough for everyone in line to hear, she scoffed. "Oh my God, did you see that? He can't even hold a bag. Pathetic." People shifted uncomfortably, but still, no one said anything. What Peter didn't know was that someone else had just walked in, someone who had been watching quietly from the far end of the store, and what happened next would leave the entire market in stunned silence. Peter tried to move faster, but in his rush, a package slipped from his trembling hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Karen, seizing the moment with glee, raised her voice for all to hear. "Oh my God, did you see that? He can't even hold a belt. How pathetic." Several customers in line shifted uncomfortably. No one said a word. But what none of them realized was that someone else had been watching, silently, patiently, from a distance. What happened next would leave the entire store stunned. Karen stood with her arms crossed, staring at Peter with a mix of disgust and condescension. "Someone needs to do something about this," she declared loudly, making sure everyone heard. "This is ridiculous. I don't have all day to deal with incompetence." A murmur swept through the line. Some people looked away, too embarrassed to meet her eyes. Still, no one intervened. Sensing their silence as validation, Karen took a bold step toward the register and pointed her finger directly at Peter. "Are you even capable of doing something as simple as bagging groceries? Who hired you? Out of pity?" Peter froze, her words cut deep. His hands trembled harder as he tried to concentrate on the scanner. "Just breathe," he told himself. "Stay calm." But then the old wounds reopened. Memories from his childhood came crashing back. The cruel voice of his stepfather echoed, "You'll never do anything right, you're just a burden." Karen, noticing his reaction, grinned cruelly. "Look at this," she sneered, gesturing at him for the crowd. "He can't even hold a bag." Peter swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. I, I just want to help, he whispered to himself, barely audible. Karen leaned in even closer, her tone sharper now. Someone needs to teach you how to actually work. You're holding everyone up. Her voice rang out through the store like a hammer striking glass. Now, the attention of the shoppers was no longer on their groceries. It was on the scene unraveling at checkout. Some shuffled awkwardly. Others whispered to each other. A few even pulled out their phones and started recording. Peter opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His eyes filled with tears, but he fought to keep them from falling. The shame was suffocating. Then, suddenly, there was a sound. Footsteps. Firm, steady, calm. Karen paused mid-sentence, startled by the interruption. She turned sharply. The entire supermarket seemed to hold its breath. Even the hum of the registers and background chatter fell silent. All eyes turned toward the man approaching the front of the store. As he drew closer, something changed in the air. A stillness, a presence. Some customers began whispering. Is that him? Karen crossed her arms with theatrical indignation. This is a complete waste of my time, she declared. Unbelievable. I can't believe I have to endure this nonsense. Customers exchanged looks. An elderly woman at the back of the line leaned toward her husband and whispered, Is no one going to step in? That poor boy looks so lost. The man hesitated. I don't know. We don't want to cause trouble, do we? But the tension was unbearable. The air felt thick with discomfort. Karen, oblivious to the rising discomfort around her, continued her rant. This is what we pay for. This kind of service is unacceptable. Some customers avoided her gaze. Others turned toward the approaching man. Tall, soft-eyed, dressed simply in jeans and a light jacket. He didn't walk with arrogance. He didn't shout. He just radiated something different. Peace, confidence, grace. The man who had been silently watching was no longer at the back of the store. He was now just a few steps away. And what happened next would be remembered far longer than any insult hurled that day. All eyes were drawn to the figure approaching the front of the store. And then, just as Karen raised her voice again, a calm but firm voice broke through the air like a bell in a silent chapel. That's enough. The words echoed through the supermarket like a quiet thunder. Karen froze. Every customer turned their head in near unison. Standing at the front of the checkout lane, calm and upright, was a man whose presence didn't need an introduction. Not because he was famous, but because the moment he stood there, something shifted. The air felt different. His stillness commanded attention more powerfully than any shout could. Some customers instinctively reached for their phones. They didn't know who he was, but they knew something was about to happen. A woman in line leaned toward her friend and whispered, This is awful, but who's going to stop her? Her friend shrugged nervously. She's too aggressive. I don't want to get involved. At the end of the line, an elderly woman clutched her purse and took a small step forward. Her eyes brimmed with sympathy as they met Peter's. But she hesitated. The weight of the moment held her back. Meanwhile, Karen, empowered by the silence of the crowd, kept going. If you can't do this job, then maybe you should find another one, she snapped. Someone has to tell you the truth. Peter's breathing grew shallow. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he struggled to stay composed. Sweat beaded on his brow. His hands were shaking, but he kept his eyes locked on the conveyor belt, refusing to meet Karen's cold stare. Across the store, Jack, the store manager, finally noticed the growing tension and began walking toward the register. But just as he started, a customer intercepted him to ask for assistance, unknowingly delaying him. Karen, arms folded, turned to the other customers and pointed at Peter with dramatic flair. You see this? She exclaimed. We're all wasting our time because he's too slow. It's ridiculous that someone like this is working the express lane. The murmurs in the line grew louder. The discomfort was now almost unbearable. Near the aisles, between shelves of canned goods and cereal boxes, a man had been silently watching the entire scene. He wore a simple white shirt and dark jeans. Nothing about him screamed importance, but there was something in his posture, his silence, his gaze. He wasn't a stranger to moments like this. Peter, focused on the register, hadn't noticed the man's presence, but he felt something. Something in the air had shifted. Karen, blinded by her own outrage, kept escalating. This is unacceptable, she shouted, drawing out each word to make sure the entire store could hear. The store was on edge. It was as if the moment was holding its breath, waiting. Then the man stepped forward. His movements were calm, deliberate, not rushed, not aggressive, but with a quiet authority that couldn't be ignored. Customers began whispering. Wait, who is he? Peter, still trying to focus, finally looked up and met the man's eyes. There was no judgment there, no pity, only steady assurance. And then, just as Karen prepared to speak again, that same calm voice, gentle but immovable, cut through the air once more. That's enough. The words silenced everything. Karen froze, stunned by the sudden interruption. The registers stopped beeping, the murmurs ceased, and every single person in that market turned to look at the man who had just spoken. From the far end of the aisle, the man walked forward, unhurried, yet each step carried undeniable weight. There was no rush in his movement, only quiet confidence. As he came closer, whispers rippled through the crowd. Wait, is that? A young man already recording with his phone leaned to someone beside him and whispered, "That's Jonathan Roumie." Karen turned sharply, trying to mask her growing discomfort. Folding her arms defiantly, she blurted out with a trace of sarcasm, "And who do you think you are? Gonna tell me how I'm supposed to act?" Jonathan stopped just a few feet away from her. His gaze was direct, steady, but not hostile. "I'm not here to tell you how to act," he said quietly. "I'm here to tell you that what you're doing is wrong." His voice was calm, but the truth in it hit like a silent wave. Karen blinked, taken aback. "Wrong? You don't even know what's going on. I'm just telling the truth. This kid is slowing down everyone." Jonathan let out a small breath, not a sigh, but something like mercy restrained. "The truth?" he said gently. "The truth is he's doing his job, carefully, kindly, and you've chosen to humiliate him for it." He stepped just slightly closer, his voice low but unwavering. "There's a difference between telling the truth and using it as a weapon." The murmurs in the store grew again, but this time they were different. Now the crowd wasn't murmuring about Peter, they were murmuring about Karen. Peter stood frozen behind the counter, wide-eyed, unsure why this stranger had come to his defense. But a wave of relief began to rise within him. Finally, someone had spoken up. Jonathan turned to him and his features softened. "What's your name?" he asked, warm but direct. Peter swallowed, his voice trembled. "Peter." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Peter, you're doing a great job here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He placed a gentle hand on Peter's shoulder, calm, steady, full of intention. "We all have hard days, but those days don't define who we are. You understand?" Peter nodded, eyes welling with tears. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. The crushing weight he'd been carrying all day had begun to lift. Karen, clearly flustered now, forced a bitter laugh and crossed her arms again. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this has nothing to do with you. I just want decent service. And clearly, this boy can't handle it." Jonathan turned back toward her, this time more serious, his voice still gentle, but now like a firm hand on a closed door. "I'm someone who believes in respect and kindness, two things that cost nothing, but it seems you've forgotten that." Karen scoffed, though her voice now wavered. "I have a right to be frustrated. I'm wasting my time here." Jonathan nodded slowly. "You do have that right. But what you don't have is the right to take that frustration out on someone who's done nothing to deserve it, especially not someone who's here to help." A silence settled over the store like a blanket. Then a woman in line, emboldened by Jonathan's words, stepped forward. "He's right," she said, clear and firm. "You can't treat that young man like that." Another voice joined from the opposite side of the line. "We're all waiting too," the man said, gesturing calmly. "But no one else is complaining." Karen looked around, suddenly searching for support. But the faces around her weren't angry, they were disappointed. A few still had their phones raised. Others simply shook their heads. The tide had turned. Karen looked around, hoping for someone, anyone, to back her up. But all she found were eyes full of disapproval. Some customers continued recording. Others simply stared with quiet conviction. No one stood with her. The entire mood of the store had shifted. What had begun as a scene of cruelty and shame had transformed into a quiet, collective act of compassion. Jonathan Roumie turned once more to Peter. His expression was soft, peaceful. "Keep being who you are," he said with a gentle smile. "Who you are is already more than enough." And with that, he turned and calmly walked toward the exit. As he passed through the automatic doors, a wave of applause broke out behind him. Customers clapped, not loudly, not theatrically, but with sincerity. Peter stood behind the register, stunned. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he mattered. Karen's heels clicked furiously across the tiles as she stormed out, her presence quickly fading. A brief silence followed. Then came soft conversations among the customers. "She had no right to talk to him that way," murmured an elderly woman. "That was incredible," said another shopper, still stunned. "I can't believe Jonathan Roumie just stood up for him like that." Meanwhile, Peter remained still, staring down at his hands that only moments ago had been shaking with shame. Now they felt lighter. Something had changed. Jack, the store manager, finally reached the register and placed a hand on Peter's shoulder. "You okay, Peter?" he asked, his voice filled with real concern. Peter looked up slowly and gave a small, genuine smile. "Yeah," he whispered, "I'm okay." But there was something new in his voice, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Jonathan's words still echoed in his mind. "Your worth isn't measured by how fast you bag groceries. Your worth is in who you are." Peter took a deep breath and returned to his work, the invisible burden he'd carried now a little lighter. Customers in line treated him differently. A woman handed him her items with a warm smile. "You're doing a great job, Peter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." An older man added as he paid, "Keep going, son. You've got more worth than most people out there." They were small gestures, but for Peter, they were like gold. They began rebuilding what had been slowly torn down. Across the store, the air had transformed. People chatted with one another, not just about what had happened, but about Peter, about kindness, about courage. A young woman still holding her phone approached Jack. "That was amazing," she said. "Did you see how Jonathan handled that? You should post it. People need to know how incredible Peter is." Jack smiled and looked at Peter, who was now moving with calm assurance. He nodded. "You're right," he said, "but the most important thing is making sure he knows it." And for a moment, the supermarket no longer felt like a place to shop. It felt like a community. The strangers who had once stood in tense silence were now speaking to each other like friends, united by what they had just witnessed. When Peter finally finished his shift, he walked slowly to the back room. Each step felt different, lighter, freer. He sat on a wooden bench, looked down at his name tag, and reflected on what had just happened. For so long, he had felt invisible, like people only saw what he lacked, never what he was. But today, something shifted. Jonathan Roumie hadn't just stood up for him, he had seen him, and that changed everything. For the first time in his life, Peter believed in something his mother had told him that very morning. "You are not a mistake, you are a gift." And now he finally believed it too. Peter walked slowly into the staff room, his steps deliberate and gentle. He sat on a wooden bench, glanced down at his uniform, and quietly replayed the events of the day in his mind. For a long time, he had felt invisible, as if people only ever saw his mistakes or what made him different. But today, something had shifted. Jonathan Roumie's words still echoed in his heart, igniting a spark of pride in a place that had once felt empty, something he hadn't even known was there. For the first time in his life, Peter felt valuable, truly deeply valuable. And for the first time, he began to believe the words his mother had spoken to him that very morning. "You're important, Peter, just as you are, to us, to the world." And now he felt it was true. Outside, Jonathan walked calmly toward a parked car. He wasn't looking for recognition or applause. For him, this had simply been another moment to do what was right. Just before stepping into the car, he paused. He turned and looked back at the supermarket. A small, peaceful smile formed on his face. He knew this moment wasn't about him. It never had been. It was about Peter. It was about the quiet, holy truth that one simple act of compassion and empathy could change, not just the course of a day, but maybe even the course of a life. What happened that day reached further than anyone expected. By the next morning, the video of Jonathan defending Peter had gone viral. Millions around the world shared it. Hashtags like #RespectForPeter, #DignityMatters, and #BeKindEverywhere began trending across platforms. Social media flooded with conversations about kindness, about how we treat others, about the hidden battles behind quiet faces. Customers who had been at the store that day shared their accounts. Their words inspired thousands of others to reflect on the power of small actions. Peter, who once feared being noticed, had now become a symbol of quiet strength and human dignity. And as the narrator's voice returned, it left a gentle but lasting reminder. Every day, we are given a choice: to lift someone up or tear them down. A single act of kindness can echo far beyond what we see. In the end, we all share the responsibility of building a world where empathy and respect are not the exception, but the standard. The next morning, as Peter walked to work, everything felt different. The cruel thoughts that used to cloud his mind had been replaced by the warmth and encouragement of the day before. Each step was lighter. When he entered the store, customers greeted him with sincere smiles. "You're doing great, Peter," said a woman. "We're lucky to have you here," added another with a wink. Peter smiled back, this time not just out of politeness, but from a place of quiet gratitude. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. And in that moment, he knew, without a doubt, he mattered. Did this story touch your heart? We have many more to share. Stories of hope, compassion, and quiet resilience. Click the screen to see more. And don't forget to subscribe for your daily dose of inspiration.